lots of concerns, and a couple of other caveats as well. To say, well, it's got to be reliable, it's got to be sustainable, but most of all, it's got to be timeless. And where possible, synchronize that with the credit flow and accuracy and otherwise. Provided it and it's not needed, doesn't matter. Again, thank you sincerely. I think the questions will be more interesting take as we go forward. Our next speaker is Dr. Rodney Cooke. We know him. Was anything I say is okay. About it. Colleagues, since March, Rodney has been Director of Policy and Technical Advisory Divisions of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which, as all of us know, is based in Rome. This work was preceded by 5 years as the Director of the Technical Center for Agriculture and Legal Cooperation, which is based in the Netherlands. It's a world we can around it. And most recently as the Deputy Director of National Resource Institute in charge of Resource Assessment and Farming Systems Program. As I said earlier, he is retired and he continues to provide some consultancy work and some consultancy services to IFAD and has joined the boards of ILRI and some levels. Rodney will be talking to us about another most interesting matter. I think all of us in here would subscribe to their the issue is smallholder farm confronting rain-fed agriculture. Lessons learned as we approach the MDGs of 2015. We heard yesterday that some of our countries are very, very intimidated. Most grateful to share with us some of the things.
Okay, thanks, Mona Paul, for that introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, it's good to be back in ICRISAT. Now, this title you see in front of you, I agree with Dave Wilson as my title, before knowing what other people are going to say. So I had to cut down on the drink last night to recast some of it in the light of what I heard yesterday. Not just in the presentations, but also in the coffee breaks and those unguarded comments after the beer drinking and things like that. However, I'm going to stay with the same structure, but with a different balance. So this is in my summary of leaflets. So I'm going to cover, first of all, smallholders seem to continue to survive despite their critics, and how they play into the agricultural development scenarios of the last 40 years, and looking specifically at lessons learned in that period. Of course, the greening of agriculture, getting the mix right in rain-fed agriculture, especially the drylands, how it plays into the climate change debates, and the move away from what we all recall as farming systems to farmers. In other words, the people-centered approach. Then I may, if I have time, mention a few research successes, but not many. Because as our chairman just said, we have a lot of critics in the 4D community and the research community saying things have been rather slow. So my final topic there is why, and what that criticism amounts to. Now, first of all, these smallholders. You've all heard of Professor Collier's criticisms. He thinks they're historical artifacts, should be written off. Bina Agarwal yesterday described it as the first or second interpretation of smallholders. In other words, are they just a drag on the economy? These doing in smallholder farms. Not just in IFAD, but in my previous job as director of CTA, I was often summoned to parliamentary meetings, usually the European Parliament, to explain why Europe spends so much money on cooperation. And that first bullet was the one that set a lot of the members of Parliament back to. Who are all these people? 500 million smallholder farms supporting 2 billion people. We thought they were just a handful of eccentrics. And they feed a third of the global population, around 80% of the food consumed. There is an awful lot of smallholder farmers around. Why do they persist? Well, we know the background, that they produce more output a hectare than large farms, they employ more people, and they use less capital. So in poor labor surplus countries, they provide food security, they spend a larger share of their income that they have on local goods, and they stem urban migration. For all those reasons, politicians like them. But of course, the advantages fade as labor becomes scarcer compared with land and capital. But when does that transition occur? Now, there's an awful lot of stuff in the literature, groups like ICRISAT, Peter Hazel, and such like, that say that transition, that move from Venus to interpretations, doesn't happen until the country gets out of low-income status. Indeed, Hazel's latest publications say until they move to middle-income status. Well, where do you stand on China? Certainly not low-income. Depends who you talk to. It's certainly developing. But there's still an awful lot of smallholders in China. Most of those in the eastern half of the country have gone to the large cities that someone mentioned yesterday because they have a better alternative. I'm supporting private sector in that aim. One of the best quotes yesterday, some of you made it as far as the PTTC yesterday afternoon and listened to Prem, who is sitting in front of me now, who being a good foundation man, quoted his boss, Bill Gates. And Bill is reputed to have said that smallholders, poor farmers, are not a problem to be solved. They are the best answer for a world fighting hunger and poverty. And he's nodding, so I got it more or less right. But the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that they play on a very tilted field. Markets demand increasing quantities, higher quality, and timely delivery. As we heard yesterday repeatedly, smallholders have less access to inputs and services. They suffer most from trade distorting policies, and of course they have the poorer infrastructure, health, education, etc. Now, the organization I've just left, IFAD, we had a meeting, a big meeting, actually last year, called New Directions for agriculture. We had both sentences there, and one of the big supporters, apart from Hazel that I mentioned, was Steve Wiggins. This slide's slightly modified by me. Of course, what does it take for smallholders to be the winners? Bill Gates interpretation. Of course, the favourable investment to offset that tilted playing field. So investment in rural public goods, the agriculture, infrastructure, education, healthcare, that has strengthened rural institutions. market support, the rural finance that the thing has just been telling us about, natural resource rights, access to technology. Now that strengthened rural institutions takes us back to Lina's group formation discussion of yesterday morning. Yesterday afternoon, we heard it in the context of producer organizations from Subhash Mehta and Professor Nayak. Other authors talk about empowerment and human and social capital. But that's what those strengthened rural institutions, that's what we're talking about. And of course, the final one, access to knowledge for sustainable farm intensification. You know, a number of people cited the successful examples in Africa, cereals in Burkina Faso, driven by smallholder development, and comparisons with the smallholder involvement in Asia's Green Revolution. So the conclusion of that meeting is that there is considerable support, not just from Bill Gates, for the more positive of the interpretations. Let's just have a quick look at lessons learned from that Green Revolution. Of course, increase of food production and high rates of adoption by smallholders. Jack Hughes, the outgoing DG from FAO last year, one of his last forwards he signed off, cited that the Green Revolution saved an estimated 1 billion people from famine. And as we know, it was built around technology packages, the associated policies, and of course the high-yielding varieties of cereals. But, as we also know, associated with land degradation, over-extraction of groundwater, loss of biodiversity, build-up of agrochemicals, etc. Indeed, Professor Swaminathan hosted a meeting on 20 years after Rio in February this year down in Chennai. And many of you have listened to him in different contexts where he talks about the need for an evergreen revolution, not another green revolution. Indeed, back to Duke, in that foreword he says, agriculture to grow must learn to save. That was in the Save and Grow publication. Many of you will remember Shivaji Pandey, certainly Dave Rowe from CIVIT, but then he went to FAO and put together that Save and Grow with a group of authors and people like me in the advisory board. Now, what did he say in that book? And what did a similar book say? Well, they said intensification is still a priority, of course. Improved inputs are still required, policies, investments in R&D infrastructure, and focus on farmers. But need for an ecological approach and increased resilience. And to take note of the additional considerations since the Green Revolution, volatile food prices, the costs of subsidies, which rule out similar approaches, climate change and energy scarcities. And that, of course, ladies and gentlemen, could be packaged up in what some people call the ecosystem approach. So, increased productivity, but enhancement of natural capital and ecosystem services, higher rates of efficiency in the use of inputs, system resilience to the different stresses, looking to biodiversity. And one example a number of presenters spoke of yesterday, a classic banner example is what's become known as conservation agriculture. I don't intend to talk to this slide, but those are the tenets of conservation agriculture. And the reason I include it still is that one of the World Congresses in CA was here in Delhi 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, it gathers support as a general approach. Now, that ecosystem approach was accompanied by a range of other changes. Of course, the externally input-orientated moving to a more ecological approach, the focus on participatory, educational and knowledge-intensive approaches, building capacity of individuals and their organizations, building on social and community capital, and promoting innovations involving a wider range of stakeholders. I'm going to return to that one, agricultural innovation systems, a bit later. But first, I now want to move quickly to rain-fed farming in the drylands. and getting the mix right. That's my third topic. What do we mean by getting a mix right? Well, one of my favorite slides, this is from Gordon Conway. He uses this at every one of the agricultural rules development days. It's getting that sustainable agriculture over the productivity, stability, equitability, and resilience. Now, for many years after Green Revolution, there was a feeling that crops rule okay. So crops is what it's about. And one consequence of that is that livestock tended to receive somewhat less attention, which is curious in the sense that, for example, 2/3 of the dry lands are used for livestock production. That bottom bullet, Africa's arid and